Hi there, I'm Tristan from the Kitesurf Centre and we're going to be reviewing the F1 Rocket Wing B2, the ASC board and the Rocket Air. So we're going to start with the Rocket B2, go through some of its features and then see how it compares and some of the bits that differ on the ASC and the inflatable board. So I've been riding this board for the last year, so I've had plenty of use of it, got to grips with it. The Rocket Wing's a really nice board because even though it's quite short, it's got a lot of stability. So this is the 5.5, it's got 85 litres, but it's got a lot of width to it and it's got a lot of depth to it, so it's a very, very stable board. So when you're looking at a board to buy, you can take that into consideration. You can probably go down a size perhaps on what you're thinking, because once you've got to grips with it, even after a couple of sessions, it does become a very stable platform. So it's got a lot of volume all the way through the board, right the way up to the nose. So it's very easy to kneel on it and get going with the wing. They've kept it very responsive by having the beveled edges. So it means that you can have a very thick board with a lot of volume there, but it cuts in. So when you are touching down or you are turning on the board, you've still got a responsive board. There's kind of similar technology that gets used in paddleboards sometimes. So they've reduced the bulk of the board, especially compared to the first edition, but kept a lot of the stability there. It is really efficient for that. So on this board and a 5-metre wing, I can get out in about 8 knots of wind quite happily. So it is really efficient. It's got a nice flat square area on the bottom which allows it to glide easily, and it's very easy to pump it up, so you don't get a lot of suction between the board and the water when you're trying to get up onto the foil in like really light winds, or if you're just trying to get going quickly between sets and you don't want to get smashed to pieces. It is super durable. So you can see it's got a little bit of a chip on the nose, but that was from getting whacked into a groin by a wave. So it's actually only just cracked the outside of the board, so it is pretty solid. It's been dropped quite a few times when you've got knackered arms walking up the beach and your forearm's tired and your board's wet and slippery. Haven't cracked any of the rails or anything, so it has done really, really well. So it's got the standard track system on the bottom, so it gives you enough adjustment that you can change the setup depending on what you want to do that day and how powered you are and the size of the waves. Even the tiniest movement on the tracking system is really noticeable immediately when you're on the water. So I tend to make sure I mark the board, or you can see on the scale here, keep a sort of track of where you are comfortable using it. And often put it back in exactly the same place, so you know exactly what you're going to get from the board. The Rocket B2 is really, really well balanced when you're carrying it. So if I were to carry it like this without the foil on, it's going to be really nose heavy. But as soon as you get the gravity foil or the phantom on the back, it's perfectly balanced. So when you're trying to walk to the water, it is exactly where you want it to be. The board is really light, so that is a big advantage over some of the competitors, and one of the main reasons I went for this board over some of the others. So if you've got a bit of a tidal range, or you're carrying it more than 10 or 20 metres to the water, then that does really, really help. So that is the Rocket board. Let's move over to the ASC. So it's not exactly the same size. So this is the 5.10 compared to the 5.5, so it's obviously not going to look exactly the same. It's got more volume, it's got a lot more size in the front of the board. But essentially the ASC is the same as the Rocket V2 in terms of its shape and volume and sizes. But it's considerably cheaper. So the ASC comes in at $869, whereas the Rocket board starts at $1,200 and goes up to about $1,400 depending on the size of it. And the reason for that is the way it's constructed. So the ASC is made with an injected EPS composite, which is slightly different to the standard wing. The cores I think are the same, but the outer shell is different. So the V2 has a bamboo shell, whereas this has more of a sort of standard SUP construction. So it's still very, very durable, but the main difference is the weight. So the ASC does come in a fair bit heavier than the standard model, which is definitely worth taking into consideration. So I think there's about 3 kilogram difference when you're looking at them sort of size for size, which doesn't sound like a lot, but once you get the foil on there as well, then it is quite a big difference carrying it to the water's edge. If you haven't got much for water, it's not so much of a problem, but definitely worth considering. Other than that, it's a very similar setup to the V2. The ASC just comes in 2 sizes, so it comes in the 5.5, which is the same as that one at 85 litres, and then the 5.10, which is the same as this one, which is 110 litres. So even though it's only a little bit longer, the difference in volume is quite considerable. Generally, when you're looking at boards, you obviously got to take your own body weight into consideration, and you want to be looking at something that's about 15 to 20 litres above your own body weight to begin with. But at the same time, I would always suggest you don't go too big, because you will progress pretty quickly with this sport, and soon you're going to be wanting to use something smaller. I found as I improved, the smaller boards actually makes it much easier. So it's more agile, it's easier to come up onto the foil, and it's easier to break the suction from the water and the board, and it's actually easier to jibe it and tack it as you improve as well. Okay, so finally we have the replaceable range. So the Rocket Air. These come in all sorts of sizes, from 5 feet right up to 7'11". So the smaller sizes are aimed solely at wingfoiling, where the bigger sizes can be a crossover board between for wingfoiling and paddleboarding, or SUP foiling if you want to use it for that as well. So they're really good all-rounders. They're made in the same way as the inflatable paddleboards. So the technology is not new, it's just been crossed over. So they're all constructed with the drop stitch configuration, so all the little dimples on the board is a piece of thread going from the top of the board to the bottom of the board. So when it's inflated, it keeps its shape, keeps its structure, and makes it really strong and rigid. We've used these in the school now as paddleboards for about 10 years, and they're absolutely bomb-proof. So we've never get punctures, and they get used all day, every day. The technology originally came from whitewater rafting, so they are made very well. Once they're inflated up to the right pressure, you can barely tell that it's a soft board, an inflatable board. They are really solid. These have been very popular so far. Main reasons are they're cheaper. So they start at I think it's about 620-ish for the smaller sizes, and they go up about £30 for each of the sizes. They're incredibly light, so you can literally pick it up with a single finger, which is very useful when you're carrying it down to the water's edge. They store very small. Let me just grab a bag so I can show you how small they pack down to. So if space is a problem, then that would be the bag with the pump and the board in it, ready to roll. So you can chuck it in the back of the ride, don't have to worry about roof racks. If you've got a little flat, then it can just go in a cupboard, which is very useful. They are also very good for loading on if you fall off a lot, because they don't hurt when you hit them. So they've just got that little bit of extra padding, and it makes them almost indestructible. So you can smash it with your knee, smash it with hard objects, drop it on the rocks, and it's gonna last. So what we found is these are ideal first boards for getting into the sport. They have really good resale value as well, because there's a lot of new people coming into the sport at the moment. So it's ideal for using for your first year or 18 months, learning the basics, using the extra volume that these provide over a traditional hardboard to get to the point where you're comfortable to go down to a much smaller board, and then shifting it on and going to something that's going to be, you know, your long-term board. So just to recap, the Rocket Wing V2 is sort of the top of the range board. Really good performance, very stable. It can be a first board, or it can be a board that you may look to go to as your second board once you've learned the basics. But it is very easy to use. It's got a lot of stability, still has very good volume, but it's responsive and it's pretty light. The ASC is more of your price point board, so similar shapes and technology as the standard Rocket Wing, but much cheaper. So it's about £500 cheaper per size, but it is heavier. And then we've got our Rocket Air boards, which are good entry-level boards, or family boards if you're looking for the bigger sizes in the paddle boards, the paddle board sort of size range. Very durable.